All right, officially, Dave Ong from Maximus.
Oh, great. We can move to the first slide, Allie, if you'd like, which is the formal introduction. So for those of you that I haven't met, my name is Dave Ong. I'm actually the Senior Director for Talent Acquisition at Maximus. For those of you that aren't familiar with Maximus, we actually are a public sector-based firm. We actually work with the government agencies that support either public healthcare functions or social welfare programs. We do that work both in the United States and in 7 other countries. And our mission is helping government serve the people. The idea that there are millions of people worldwide that aren't getting access to critical services. And it's our job to provide either consulting or program management capabilities that'll help facilitate those transactions. At Maximus, where I've been now for a little over 16 years, I guess it's been now, I'm actually the Senior Director of Talent Acquisition. So I oversee all of our strategic sourcing functions, including campus recruiting and all of our diversity, equity, and inclusion-based recruiting functions as well. You can see from this slide, I've actually had a pretty long career fair. I think when, a long career in university relations. When Allie mentioned the term wisdom before, I think she actually meant age. I think she's just referring to the fact that I've been around for a long time. I've managed campus recruiting programs primarily at Booz Allen Hamilton Consulting in DC, Citigroup Corporate Investment Bank in New York, and I got my start many years ago managing large parts of the campus recruiting team at Capital One in Richmond, Virginia. Unfortunately, I don't have any formal ties to the University of Miami, although I do have a couple of nephews that have graduated from there in recent years. And while I've talked about my day job, I should mention that I also have kind of an evening job. I don't get paid for it, but it is actually a pretty important role these days, at least to me, and very personal. I'm actually the president-elect of the National Association of Colleges and Employers, which is the leading nonprofit in the United States that focuses on promoting the hiring of folks like yourselves into jobs and internships. And I should point out that your staff at TOPL has also taken some enormous leadership roles in that organization, and I thank them for their service. Okay. I should also mention before we get too far into this that Maximus will be at the career fair later on this week. We've got at least 3 or 4 representatives that are going to be on handshake throughout the duration of that career fair, including at least 2 alums. Megan Weitzner, who works in our business development function and who just graduated from about 1.5 years ago, as well as Samantha Jimenez, who works in our research and development area parts of IT. She was an engineering major, if memory serves, and she is based out of our Denver offices, and she's an alumnus from at least 3 or 4 years ago. They'll also be joined on there by Richard Combs, who, while he's not an alumnus of University of Miami, he's actually a former employee of the Career Center that I stole away from Christian a few years ago. So they will be there to answer any kind of questions you have about the career fair. So, all right, so enough about Maximus. My job for the next half hour or so is to provide some information to you, and Ellie's going to scroll down the agenda. I think before we get too far into that slide, I would like to ask people to weigh in on the chat. I'd kind of like to find out how many of you actually have been to a career fair at TOPL sometime in the last year or so. So if you want, you can raise your hands, or you can use the clapping or thumbs up in the reaction chat box. How many affirmatives are we seeing, folks? Okay, a couple folks in the chat, a few thumbs up. But based on this, a lot of rookies, I think a lot of first timers are going to be attending this. So that's great. So I want to make sure we keep that in mind. For those of you that have actually been to the career fair, I'd love to get a couple of you to weigh in, maybe just take the microphone off and unmute yourself. I'd love a couple of opinions on what you remember about the career fair. Like if somebody was asking you to give a memory about what the career fair was like, what was the atmosphere like, or what were the interactions like? Are a couple of you comfortable with weighing in for the rest of us?
It almost feels like almost like speed dating with a whole bunch of employers because it's like everybody has on, like their smiles, their almost like their Sunday best, and you really have to kind of put your best foot forward. Not just you, but also the employer too. Right. So you guys can get a good understanding of those expectations and what one another is looking for, and whether or not you guys are a good match. So that's kind of how I interpret it.
And that is an excellent, excellent comparison, to be honest with you. So that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Who else? Anybody else have a memory or something that sticks out in their mind about career fair transactions?
I can go. I would say it's more of like when you enter like class for like the first time, like in the beginning of the year, because like you don't know who you're gonna click with and stuff like that. It's like an unknown territory, you know. Unless like you do your research like beforehand, so you know what to expect of the class itself, which would be the career fair and the companies that are there, and familiarize yourself. Then you'll get comfortable, because in the beginning the air can be a bit tense. But then once you see everybody like chatting around and you start asking questions and you start conversating, then you start to click with certain businesses and companies and stuff that are at the career fair. And I think that's what really sticks with me for most of it. It's like basically going into school for the first time until you get yourself into that comfortable setting and break the tense air. That's when it's good.
That's another great analogy. Thank you for that, to me, because there is a certain fear of the unknown that probably has to be taking place in these career fairs, because particularly in that kind of traditional setting, that you never know who you're going to be talking to in theory, right? Because you're going to this career fair, you don't know who each organization is bringing, you don't know what roles they play, et cetera. So there's always a certain degree of uncertainty. Now, I think we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth during this discussion, because I think one thing that the virtual environment is going to provide you with from an advantage standpoint is that I believe you're going to know who you're going to be talking to in regards to how you use the Handshake Career Fair platform. So we'll talk about that, and I'm sure the the Career Center folks will have some opinions there as well. So for those of you that have not gone to a career fair before, haven't done it in recent memory, I think those were two very accurate portrayals as to what to expect. The things we want to lay out for you is that there are going to be a ton of companies there. Ali or Christian, do you know how many companies are signed up to be attending right now?
Yes, we do have, and Sasha, correct me if I'm wrong, as of today, we were at 54.
That's great.
Yeah, 53.
Okay.
53.
So that's a lot of companies, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about some of that research. So, and how you're actually going to go about taking apart those companies. There's going to be a lot of communication. You would expect there to be a certain degree of conversation. I think the reference to speed dating was kind of right on, is that we want to know a little bit about you, you want to know a little bit about us. So there's going to be that kind of feeling out process. What I think will be different is that there is going to be a very set time limit to these discussions. And if I remember correctly from the Handshake app, I think your window of opportunity is somewhere around 10 minutes. Okay, so we'll kind of walk you through a plan for how you utilize that time wisely. So, and then the last thing I think, I'd be irresponsible if I didn't kind of mention this, is that you may be talking to companies that may or may not know what the rest of their plan looks like in terms of hiring for the school year. Is that there are companies that are clearly going to be there because they have jobs posted on Handshake. They have interviews scheduled, whether it's for internships or full-time hires. But there may be some companies there that are using this to test the waters. They may not be committed to hiring yet, or they don't know what their forecasts look like. So they may be using this as a branding opportunity. Okay? So you may see some of that. And I don't want you to be discouraged if that's the case. The fact that they're investing the time and money to attend these events certainly should be read as a sign that they are vested in making sure that they maintain a reputation at University of Miami, which quite frankly takes a lot of time and takes a lot of money. And companies aren't going to be doing that if they don't think that there's hope for hiring in the near future. Okay, so please keep that in mind, and don't be discouraged if they don't have interview dates or have committed to forecasts as of yet. Okay. One thing that's clearly happened is that companies have had to regroup and completely redo all of their campus recruiting strategies given this virtual world. And as a result, we're still unsure in terms of what the next steps need to be. Okay. It's going to be a very fluid situation for the next couple of months or so. What I want you all to do, and here's where I think that you can really put your education to use, is I want you all to think about the critical thinking skills that you possess right now and how you can use those when it comes to creating an effective career fair strategy. Right? We've identified the fact that there's going to be 50 plus potential employers attending these events. So we want to make sure you understand how you should be researching these organizations, and more specifically, researching the individuals that you might be talking to. Something that will give you a leg up in those conversations. We want to spend some time talking about the documentation you need to have prepared either before the career fair or certainly afterward. It could be your resume, it could be your LinkedIn profile, it could be a cover letter. Okay. And then we also want to make sure that you're equipped with creating a first impression, because we think if you do all of those, Ali, if you can move one bullet point down from here on this slide, we're hoping that that will create what I think the ultimate goal should be here, is that you want there to be some type of follow-up discussion, some type of follow-up transaction. A lot of people feel like if they walk away from the career fair and don't have a guaranteed interview, that they're a failure. And I said that couldn't be farther from the truth, particularly in this atmosphere. The idea here is that it's a first look. It's really a 10-minute transaction where the objective, in my opinion, should be to make sure that you're going to have some kind of follow-up discussion. That could be in the form of an interview. It could be an invitation to an event, okay? But you want to make sure that the dialogue continues. And we're going to give you some tips as to how to navigate that. Okay, any questions up to this point, or anything we should be covering that we haven't put on this agenda yet? Okay.
Again, feel free to put those questions in the chat and or just jump in.
Great, perfect. Thank you, Ali. Next slide. So I want to talk about research here. And if you can hold at this bullet for a second, Ali, before you move on to the next one. I've probably been going to career fairs now for every bit of 20 plus years or so. So I don't want to think about how many I've probably attended over the years, probably about 200 plus, okay? So if you're looking at ways to make a bad impression, I can't think of one that's worse that your first line to the person you're talking to at a career fair is, what is it your company does, okay? If you're looking at making a positive impression, it's not a good opening line, folks, all right? What does it suggest to you about a candidate when the first question out of their mouths is, what does your company do? And I'm asking this to everybody on the panel. What kind of impression do you think gets formed on the part of an employer when a candidate asks that question? Feel free to light up the chat box if you want. A level of unpreparedness, that maybe they didn't care enough to prepare, they haven't done research. All of those are correct. Right. What it implies to me is that they didn't do their homework. So they're excited about the idea of maybe working for a company in a certain function, but they didn't spend time to learn a little bit about the industry that I'm involved with. Right. I'm seeing a couple other responses here: not ready for that company, not a good fit. Okay. Certainly all potential responses or potential first impressions that have been created in my mind as the employer when I hear that question. Right, so we want to make sure you don't ask that question. So we're going to give you a couple of tools over the course of the next few minutes that will hopefully better prepare you in terms of how to research those organizations. Ali, if you want to scroll down on this slide a little bit, we can talk about making sure that you know all the relevant data points, at least in terms of the big picture. You don't need to know every single financial record. You don't need to know about every kind of transaction that's out there. But there's certainly a few areas that I think you can center your homework on, at least for 8 or 10 companies out of those 54, 55 companies that are showing up this week. Right, so you're likely going to start on the website. Ali, if you want to scroll down the next 4 or 5 bullets, certainly you should know what industry they play in, what it is that they're offering as an organization. So what are their products or what are their services? You'd love to find out more about their reputation or where do they stand in the market. Are they a market leader? What kind of ranking do they have in that market? What is the press saying about them? I usually think that you're going to learn more about an organization by reading what others are saying about them versus what they're saying on their website. So looking for press releases, subscribing on LinkedIn to see what kind of news is being traded out about them. Doing a couple Google searches is always a good idea. Okay.
Dave, I'll throw in one more if you don't mind.
Right.
Those of you who are on Handshake, which I know many of you are, and if not, you'll be on there quickly. Handshake has a review section where students and alums can go in and review employers. And that's a fairly new feature, but it's been around for at least a year and it's pretty well populated. So in addition to some of the other resources Dave mentioned, that's another good one.
Right. I know Christian is weighing in with Glassdoor being another great resource for a lot of this information you're seeing here. I'll toss out a couple others. There's a lot of different branding sites out there, folks. outside the company's own employment website, you could look at, as we mentioned before, Handshake, because there are a lot of companies spending a lot of money to build their brand on that particular platform. You could look at websites such as WayUp, WAYUP.com, which is what I kind of describe that as the Indeed for Generation Z. You could look at websites, we talked about Glassdoor, you could look, any other students or any folks on the call seeing any other branding sites that are coming to mind?
Vault.
Vault is a great one, thank you. Terrific example there. Okay. Because, companies sometimes have control over that content, sometimes they don't. So you might get a very realistic point of view when you look at some of these websites, Glassdoor and Vault in particular, where people can weigh in with their own personal opinions. Okay. So great information to have. Okay. Mission, I think, is a very critical thing. Understanding the mission and the values of an organization. What exactly do they stand for? Because that's something that you can work your way into the conversation that I think will really create a really strong first impression, is if you do have a shared value plan. Okay. And lastly, any kind of information about job descriptions. So what positions, whether it's an internship or a full-time position, have they posted on Handshake? And more specifically, what type of skills are they looking for when you read that job description? What kind of qualifications? Because those are things that you want to bring up during the course of that 10-minute discussion, assuming you can make time for that. How well do I match up with the requirements of the jobs that each company is looking for? Okay. Any questions or comments about research? Are there things that some of you might be doing outside of what we've talked about here? Anything you might want to share with some of your fellow students? Or any additional tips from any of the folks from the Career Center?
Well, it kind of goes along with what you have already said, but I also look at like performance in terms of like stock and whatnot, and I'll look at articles based on stock performance and how their quarterly reports are done, and the explanation behind all that and stuff as well.
Okay. So if it's a publicly traded company, say for example, how well they've been performing in that area, or what are investors saying about that? So looking at an investor relations page is a great idea. Okay, that's obviously if you're looking at a large business or a Fortune 500 company, say for example. I think there was a question in the chat box and it just went away. Allie, can you read the last question that popped up?
I can go ahead and read it.
Oh, sure, great.
Sure. So this question is from Kyle. He says, I know that this is unrelated to what we're talking about right now, but I was wondering if you had any tips for making a good impression in 30-minute group sessions.
In a 30-minute group session, so something like a coffee chat session or some type of info session or something like that?
Mm-hmm. So Handshake on this new platform has the 10-minute one-on-one sessions.
Right.
And then also the 30-minute group sessions where you'll have anywhere from 10 to maybe 50 students.
Okay. The one thing that comes to mind, first of all, and I think some of the things that I could answer that with are going to show up on a later slide. So let me give you kind of a short answer, and then can we re-ask that as we get a little bit later into the presentation? I've gone through a few more slides. The first thing that I would tell you is that anytime you're in some type of group situation, it's important that you're not seen as the person hogging the conversation. Now, I don't know enough about how that particular platform is going to work, so I might need some help from the folks in the Career Center. But if you've got 8 or 10 people talking to one employer or one employee from a company, you want to be cognizant of the fact that those folks are there because they've been invited or because they have a special interest in the organization, the same as you. So it's important to make sure that they're given an equal chance at succeeding and that you're not seen as somebody that might not be a great team player. Okay. That to me is one way. You need to be able to share the spotlight, if you will.
And going off of that, for the what are you supposed to talk about for the one-on-one 10-minute interviews? Like, how do you start the conversation? What's the point of the one-on-ones?
Can we hold that question for a quick second, Jay? Because I think we're addressing that on one of the next slides.
Yeah, no worries. So thank you.
We'll totally get to that, I promise. Christian, I think you had a question on there that also kind of popped in and out, or maybe an answer.
I was just saying that sometimes in those in any group setting, when people have a lot of questions about that are relevant only to them, that are specific to their major, to their
Right.
year in school, to their internship, to their goals, that really becomes selfish because it doesn't relate to other people. It's okay to maybe ask one of those
Right.
questions,
Right.
but when it's over and over, then it becomes, kind of
Yeah.
commandeering it.
Yeah, that's a great point. You could actually start out with something kind of broad-based that might be applicable to a number of the folks in there, and then kind of peel the onion as you go along, or give other people a chance to ask questions that might help with that onion peeling, if you will. That's great advice. Thank you, Christian. Okay. Anything else related to research? All right, why don't we move to the next slide? So, Jake, this is where we're going to talk a little bit about the question that you just put out there, and you can fill in the whole slide here, if you would, Allie. So, one of the things that you really need to be focused on is in my opinion, most people formulate a first impression somewhere in the first 50 to 60 seconds of when they're talking to somebody. All right, I'm sure other people have different standards by which that first opinion forms, but for a great many people, it happens in under a minute or so. So one of the pieces of advice that we like to provide here is that you need to make sure you've got a good elevator pitch about yourself. Something that you can recite in about 20 to 30 seconds, but something that can also be easily customized to suit the conversation. So maybe it's something tailored to an individual you're speaking with based on their own personal background. Maybe it could be industry-based, an elevator pitch that talks or makes reference to your experience in a certain industry or in a certain major that they might be looking for. Okay, think about the relevant points. It should be who you are. My name is Dave Ong. I'm actually the Senior Director of Talent Acquisition at Maximus. I oversee our recruiting functions. I went to the University of Richmond where I was an English major. Okay, the things that identify you, things that might be unique, but also a couple of references to something that suggests that perhaps you have done some homework about an organization, or perhaps you have a shared value or shared mission. So that pitch could include something like, well, I noticed that Maximus has a mission of helping government serve the people. And that appealed to me because I do a lot of volunteer work with certain homeless organizations, or I volunteer for a lot of child advocacy groups. And that's something that's appealing to me. Okay. Something that in theory creates a connection. And while I didn't put it on the slide, I can make mention of one thing that I think is a great reference point for you all, because I'd be willing to bet that there's going to be a significant percentage of University of Miami alumni that are going to be representing their employers at the career fair. Does anybody from the Career Center have any estimates as to what percentage of participants are usually alums? Like 20 or 30% or something even higher than that maybe? Or
You guessed correctly. It's usually at the very low end, 25%, and we've had as high as 50. So it does depend on the event and the number of recruiters, but we know that, for this event, it's the students will get to see who they're meeting with on those one-on-one sessions. So that's a little bit different in terms of having a heads up and the ability to do that research you mentioned.
Right. So when we talk about that research and making a first impression, one of those things that you all can really take advantage of is what I call the affiliation bias. Has anybody ever heard that before? Anybody on the call? You can raise your hands if you want, give me a visual or a thumbs up in the chat room, whatever. But there's this notion that people have a natural bias or are drawn to other individuals that have some type of common affiliation. It could be that they belong to the same club, or perhaps they grew up in the same neighborhood, same hometown, say, for example. But one of the strongest affiliation biases that exists out there is educational institutions. We're naturally drawn to people that went to school, the same school as we did, and had a common experience. So that's something that you could also use to your advantage. So when you're saying that you went to the University of Miami, you could also mention that I've been involved with these activities. So maybe I belong to a certain Greek organization. Maybe I was an RA. Maybe I'm performing a job as a tutor in a certain academic department. Okay. Revealing some of that information could be very helpful because you might be talking to somebody that completely relates to one of those experiences. And as a result, might be more drawn to you in part as a result of that common affiliation. So be aware that that bias exists. Okay. These are all things you can work into your elevator pitch. We talk about the visuals. At a typical career fair, I think University of Miami students are usually encouraged to dress fairly professionally, and I don't want to insert my own personal bias in here. From the Career Center standpoint, are there tips that you're offering in terms of what people should be wearing for these types of interactions?
Absolutely. I'll chime in. In typical Zoom-ish fashion, even though we are using the handshake platform, when students go into the Career Expo, we do give the information about suggested clothing. And I think we want to have the mentality of dress head to toe, dress professionally, because, and everybody has their own choices. If you want to be in your pajama pants and you're more comfortable with that, know what's going to be on screen. But the feedback I've gotten from students is that if they are dressed professionally, then that helps them feel more professional and ready to go. So again, we have all that guidance that we have on our website. And again, we can put that info in the chat.
Great. Thanks, Ellie. I do think that employers are pretty understanding in this day and age because they know that because of the pandemic, there may be students that don't have access to professional gear. So, if you have something that is appropriate business dress or something like that, it can't hurt to use it, but I don't think it's going to be held against you if you don't have something like that handy.
Yeah, I'll chime in here as well, Dave. I think that if you don't have a jacket, like, a blazer or whatever, I don't stress out about that.
Right.
Or one that doesn't fit right, whatever. You want to look your best so you feel your best, and so we want you to be authentically you, what's going to make you feel comfortable. Right. And so I think if you have like a dress shirt or, a sweater, whatever's going to look nice, and that's going to make you feel confident, then go for it.
Right.
We don't want folks stressing out and trying to like buy a head to toe look when it's not really necessary. So, yeah.
Okay.
No t-shirt. Probably not a t-shirt though.
Right. I think going for presentable is probably the right goal here. So how about that? Okay. Allie, can you scroll down a little bit further on the slide? I think there are a couple more bullets. We do want to talk about the background visuals, folks. The idea that you probably want to test beforehand what kind of view you're giving the employer. So ideally, maybe not having your bed showing in the background might be a good call. Making sure you have the right amount of lighting, say, for example. All things you can test beforehand. Test your speakers, make sure you got the right volume. If you don't want to worry about what your dorm room looks like, your apartment looks like, download a good green screen. And I think I'm sure University of Miami probably has their own custom one that can be downloaded as well. So, okay. Now, Jake, you were asking before, what is the best way for me to make a good impression? And for all the things we've talked about here, I think this bullet point, the idea that you're asking good, pertinent questions, that to me, just from my own personal standpoint, is the thing I remember more than anything else in a 10-minute transaction. Are they asking pertinent questions? And better yet, are they asking a question where it's obvious they've done a lot of homework and have a sincere interest in my organization?
Okay.
Now, an example of that could be, for example, well, I noticed in this article that I read about your company that there was a change in the business model in the last 6 months or so. Can I ask a little bit more? Can you expand on that? What led you to make that change? Or how is that progressing so far? Or how is it creating new opportunities? Okay. Questions that show you've done some homework really do resonate in the minds of the people that you're asking those questions to. Okay. They just confirm you've done that. I also personally love to get questions from time to time that if you'd spent a minute or two looking up the answer on Google, you might not have found it. So maybe something that requires a different type of response, maybe not a data point type of response, but maybe an opinion. And I'll put this back out on the chat and to anybody that wants to take a crack at it verbally. What topic do you think most people that are going to be representing their companies on these career fairs what is the one topic that they're probably all most comfortable talking about to you?
Themselves?
Themselves, exactly right. So asking questions about their own background or about their own journeys, say, for example. I'll give you a question that I used to use during interviews. I don't think you'd want to use it during a career fair, but I think it'd be a great question for you to keep in your back pocket for an interview. And I'll ask that if you use it, that you can't use it during any Maximus interviews. But the question I used to ask when I was interviewing for jobs 15, 20 years ago is I would ask every person that interviewed me in a final round, if they were the CEO for one day, what's the first thing they'd change about the culture of the organization? Because it's a question I could ask of multiple people and I could get a lot of different responses.
That's great.
All right. Does that help a little bit, Jake? Does that kind of go to the heart of what you're asking about?
Thank you.
Great. You're welcome. I think there were a couple other comments that came up in the chat box. Allie, anything we need to cover?
We had a couple of
Can I-
students. Oh, sorry. I think it was
Can-
Christian. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it was just me saying, asking what they love most about working there, those kinds of things. But it gets to your culture question. But I wanted to go back. You were talking about your background and not having your bed and all that. For those of you who have roommates, just making sure that they're not walking behind you, so that they know that you're going to be part of this experience. But then also, I know for those of you who have pets, especially cats, they seem to be really drawn to the screen. We have several staff members that happens to all the time. So you may want to avoid those distractions because you're probably going to be nervous as it is. And so then having to deal with a rogue cat or dog or anything like that. So just think about those things. And not having light behind you, because if you have light behind you, it's just going to, you're not going to be able to see you. So you want to have the light source, whether it's a window or whatever, coming from behind the camera.
Yeah, that's where downloading that green screen might be a good idea as well. And I will tell you that when I've talked to the couple of career fairs that I've worked online in the last couple of days or so, I've done maybe 2 or 3 of them. I have seen the majority of the folks on the calls using earphones or headphones, which is probably another way to make sure you're not distracted by other noises that might be in your room or wherever you're actually taking these calls. That's a great point. Thank you, Christian. Okay. Sasha, you had said there were some other comments or some questions?
No, it was Christian's comment.
Okay, great. All right, Allie, next slide, please. So, and we kind of talked through this already. You can keep going down, Allie, if you'd like. So we talked about this. The pitch statement should be who you are, what you're doing at University of Miami, what you study, what you're involved in, and why you're interested in the employer. The last piece of advice I'll add here is that I never think it's a great idea, if it's at all avoidable, to schedule the companies that interest you most. So say, for example, you've researched all 54 companies and there's maybe 6 or 8 companies that you're really interested in, and maybe there's 1 or 2 that you're really dying to work for. What I would tell you is do not put those first 2 companies first on the list, and that you'd ideally like to have a couple of practice rounds under your belt before you're talking to those companies that really interest you the most. So if there's any way to organize that scheduling, you're allowed to sign up for certain times. That to me is one of the great advantages to this type of online career fair, is that you're not going to spend a lot of time wasted standing in line for somebody to talk to you in person, right? You have very specific timeframes that are pre-reserved. And I should also mention that you're going to be able to see the profile of the people that you're going to be talking to, which is also very different, right? You could actually look somebody up on LinkedIn because you're going to be talking to Richard Combs from Maximus. So that gives you some time to do some additional research on that person and not just the company. But again, important to remember that the companies that interest you the most should not be first on your list in terms of the order of which you're talking to them. Okay. Allie, next slide, please. So we talked before about making sure that you've got the right documentation ready to go. I don't know enough about the platform because I haven't used it yet, but Christian or Allie or Sasha, what kind of documentation, whether it's a resume or a LinkedIn profile, what can be posted in the student's profile when they're actually waiting in line to talk to somebody from a company?
Yeah, I could definitely chime in with that. The first thing that I would say is update your handshake profiles. The employers can go ahead and download every attendee, and with that would go your years, your resumes, and all the information that you do have on Handshake. So update it, fill it out, make it as robust as possible. And remember to share your contact information with the employer in case a connection does happen.
Okay, thank you, Sasha. Okay, so as you're completing this documentation, one of the pieces of advice I like to provide to students is that it's easy to write up your resume or LinkedIn profile where you're talking about certain experiences and you're basically kind of memorizing or regurgitating the job description, right? These are my duties, these are my responsibilities, right? And that's fine. That certainly should be part of that documentation. But I think it's sometimes equally as important to make sure that an employer, when they're looking at those documents, not just sees what you're capable of doing, but also how well you've performed these functions. What type of effect or what did it have to the bottom line of an organization? Or how well did you do against certain goals when you're telling some of these stories on your resume or on your LinkedIn profile? Okay. Not just what you've done, but how well you've done it or how well you perform that function. Okay. Allie, you can scroll down to the rest of the slide. I'm a big fan, folks, of making sure that you all are putting a lot of evidence about career readiness skills on your resume. So taking a look at the job descriptions, this I think is another very good exercise. If there are 2 or 3 companies that have job descriptions that you find really appealing, read the job descriptions a couple of times. Okay, take a look at the responsibilities and then take a hardcore look at the skills required for those positions. Are there 5 or 6 skills? So 2 or 3 of them might be more hard skills or technical skills, right? So maybe the job description is focusing on your ability to build a financial model in Excel. Or maybe it's focused on your ability to use a certain tool to perform research. It might also make references to you being a good team player. It might make references to having strong critical thinking skills, or do you present well? Okay, take a look at those requirements. Those are all evidence of career readiness skills. And if you don't know what a career readiness skill is, please Google that, NACE Career Readiness Model. Okay, you'll find a group of 8 or 10 different skills that a significant number of employers have really subscribed to. Those skills that best predict performance on the job. Okay. So take a look at those skills. What is it that an employer is looking for? And do you see evidence of it on your resume or on your LinkedIn profile? Is there a reference to something that shows you possess strong critical thinking skills? Is there a reference that shows you're able to build a financial model of some type? Okay. Customize, 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 folks. That goes for the cover letter. Right? You probably have a few companies that are still requiring cover letters. Maximus doesn't do it, but I do know plenty of my peers that say their companies do still require it. They might look at it as a writing sample, say, for example. So make sure you have a standard template that can be easily customized to that particular employer or to a certain industry. Okay. Think about a thank you note, folks. I'm continuously shocked, particularly in a really competitive job market that you all are going to be facing, that you should be using every single opportunity to make an impression on a recruiter or on a decision maker. One of those ways you could be doing that is actually being one of the 3 people, I think, statistically, that actually takes the time to fill out a thank you note and send it to the person that they talk to. And I think I might be being generous with that 1 in 3 estimate, right? So if I've had a conversation with you, even if it's only 10 minutes or so, think about asking for the contact information or just pulling it up on the Handshake profile that person has established in the Career Fair tool. Send them a thank you note within 24 hours of that conversation, maybe even sooner than that, thanking them for taking the time to speak with you, following up on a couple of points that you talked about, and maybe emphasizing a couple of skills that you think make you a desirable candidate, but something that reaffirms your interest in the organization and reminds them of who you are. Okay. Like I said, very few candidates take advantage of that these days. And given the fact that that's something you should be doing through email, I'm frankly a little mystified that more candidates don't take advantage of it. It really is a way to stand out in this day and age, folks. Okay. Any comments from anybody in the Career Center or any questions about this particular slide?
I think you got it.
Okay. Next up, I know we're getting toward the end here. Oh, I'm sorry, the cell phone greeting. I think she thinks it's a good idea that when you're in the job or internship search, to listen to your cell phone greeting, which sometimes can be a little casual. I've called candidates back in my days when I was a recruiter where I found their cell phone greeting to be a little off-putting, to be honest with you, or sometimes downright inappropriate. So listen to it real quickly and just make sure that it sounds somewhat professional to a certain degree anyway. So, okay. And then I mentioned before, ultimately, I think your goal here is to ensure that there's some type of follow-up discussion. Okay. What can I do to ensure that there's going to be another transaction between myself and the companies that I'm talking to? One way to do it is make sure you commit some type of follow-up contact information. So getting somebody's email address, or are they willing to spend a couple minutes on Zoom to follow up on a couple questions that I've had? Can I connect with them on LinkedIn? These are all ways that you can try to remain connected to these individuals. They might give you the name of a recruiter for that particular school, like who is actually covering the University of Miami for Maximus, right? That would also be an appropriate contact again. You should absolutely take a minute or so to ask some questions about when is it you're going to be on campus next, or virtually going to be on campus. So do you have coffee chats, or do you have branding events, or some type of information session coming up? Right? What kind of events are you sponsoring? Again, things that show that you have a future interest in this particular organization. Do they have a campus ambassador program, or do they have former summer interns that are able to answer questions about their experiences there? Okay. These are all ways to ensure that you're going to remain connected to the organization in some form or fashion. Okay. One other thing that I actually will throw into this as well that I think could also be helpful is that think about how you utilize your own personal network to get connected or remain connected to a representative from these organizations. And I might need some help from the Career Center folks here as well, but I know that for my alma mater, I can actually search in our alumni career website. I can plug in the name of a company, and it'll actually list all the alumni that have said they've either worked at that organization or are currently working for that organization. Those are people that you might want to connect to, because you might find that there are decision makers there that you can speak with or connect to that might be willing to answer some questions or sit down with you for 5 minutes over a Zoom chat. Okay. Ali or Christian or Sasha, are there any tools that students can take advantage of that connects them to alumni in that way or helps them build out their network other than just LinkedIn?
Absolutely. And I'll ask Sasha again, if she doesn't mind, to put it in the chat. So for those of you who haven't heard, our platform for connections, our U-Shadow program, mentoring is called Cane to Cane. And what that allows you to do is exactly what Dave mentioned. You can search for alums, and it is open to our friends in the community as well, parents, friends of the U. But there are a lot of alums in there in a variety of industries, and we're continuing to increase the number of alumni that check in, create accounts, and connect with you all because they want to help students. And, you know, again, Dave mentioned earlier, the power of the U network is huge.
Great. I think Christian weighed in with a chat comment that Handshake has a similar capability or similar function. So that might be something to tap as well. You could even do something, frankly, after the career fair is done, as simple as Googling the name of the company and then LinkedIn and then University of Miami. Because when you do something like that, you're inevitably going to get a list of people on a Google search that shows their LinkedIn profiles. It'll probably say when they graduated. It will list what position they've held within those organizations. You might want to try connecting with a few of those folks, particularly if it looks like they've been around there long enough to be part of the decision-making process. Like they might have some influence over the hiring process. Those are great people to connect to, folks. Not just people who graduated in the last 2 or 3 years. Okay. And I think that covers all my formal information, Allie. What questions can we answer for the folks that are on the call?
Do you have any time management tips? Because it's such a short amount of time that like don't get caught up saying this or anything like that.
That's a good point. I haven't heard too much in terms of complaints from any of the folks that we've had from Maximus that have been working these fairs. I will say that sometimes there are a few folks that have a tendency to kind of drag on a little bit longer, but I think the way it works is I believe you're given a 10-minute window. I don't know, is there an opportunity to extend by another 2 minutes by the employer, Allie or Christian? I haven't used it yet, so I don't know if it has that feature.
Chime in with that.
It's 10 minutes max? Okay.
It's 10 minutes max, but it can go over up to 5 to 10 minutes more if the conversation is really engaging. But it is important to keep in mind that either you have an interview or a one-on-one appointment next, and the employer might also have one next.
Okay. So one of those things for the person who asked that question, you might want to consider asking if it's coming up on that 10-minute mark. And I think you might get a visual warning, if I remember correctly, when you're close to that 10 minutes being up. You could ask them, do they have another appointment directly after that? If they don't, then maybe they'd be willing to spend another minute or two to answer some additional questions. But in regards to the time management, I think it's important just to go in there with an agenda. A set group of questions that you might have for each employer, or a set of custom questions that are specific to a certain employer or a certain industry. I think you should make some assumptions that I don't think in all likelihood, by the time you break the ice, do some introductions, and leave time to follow up at the bitter end, my guess is you're not going to get through any more than about 2 or 3 questions over the course of 10 minutes. Okay, it's hard to answer anything broadly beyond that time frame, anything, in my opinion, beyond 3 questions. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Okay. Who else? Anybody else?
I have a question.
Of course.
So for like one of the companies I'm looking at is Arco, and they have several different people that you can do your one-on-one chats with. I think one's like the vice president and a recruiter, and one's like principal. Which one do you suggest having that conversation with?
I don't know that I would tell you to do it just based on title alone, Elizabeth.
Okay.
I think that when you talk to people that look like they're more senior in an organization, the advantage there is that they could, as I made reference to before, they could influence the process more perhaps than somebody who may have only graduated a couple of years ago, right? So maybe they're a hiring manager, or maybe they head up the HR department that's making the decisions in the process, right? And those are people that might be inclined to pick up the phone, call the recruiter and say, hey, I talked to this great U of M student today. I really connected with that person. Can you make sure they got on the interview list? If you're senior enough in an organization, you might have the power and the pull to be able to do something like that. So that's the advantage at that level. Now, having said that, they may not be able to answer the questions that mean the most to you. Like, what are my first 30 days going to be like? What's the training or the development program looking like? That they might be too far removed from that process. So a lot of it really might come down to what do you need to know about that organization and figuring out who's in the best position to answer those questions. I'm not sure if I can give you a firm, hard, and fast on that one, right?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have you seen, Elizabeth, through any of your research that any of them are alums?
I don't think they're alums, no.
Okay, that would be another way to potentially look, but yeah.
Elizabeth, I'll give you one other hint. The research that you do might point you in the right direction about who you might be able to make the best connection with. So if you look at their LinkedIn profile, again, is there something that you have in common with that person in terms of an experience, a major? You could even go so far, and I know this sounds kind of weird and a little creepy, but I think knowing who the person is and what makes them tick could be something else good. You could look at their social media profile if you wanted to. If you really want to do a little detective work, are they on Facebook? Are they on Instagram or something like that? Is there something that they're posting that resonates with you that you could build into your elevator pitch, say, for example? Okay.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. You have to know what triggers somebody, right? What motivates somebody. And sometimes learning a little bit about what makes them tick really can be a competitive advantage. Okay. What else? Great questions, everybody.
We want to make sure too, and Sasha is on the call because she's our handshake technical expert. Because of the new platform, that this is a form 2 to ask questions about the virtual handshake platform. So for many of you, this may be the first event that you're doing virtually. If anybody has any questions about the signing up ahead of time, I know we briefly alluded to this, but you have to sign up for sessions in advance. If you wait until the day of to sign up, then you're going to see potentially what is left in terms of, one-on-one sessions may be booked, and there may only be opportunities to sign up for the larger group sessions. So if you haven't done that just yet, I would make sure you get registered first. And Sasha, correct me if I'm wrong, get registered, and then you can go in from there, and the system will prompt you to sign up with companies or organizations of interest to you.
Great. Well, folks, if there are no other questions, I did put my email in the chat box, so please feel free to follow up if there's something that we didn't answer here that comes up in your head later. Otherwise, I do want to wish you the best of luck. I think I'm going to be on for 1 hour of the career fair in particular. So if you want to have a follow-up chat with me, please feel free to go on to Handshake and look for my profile. I'd be happy to talk to you then. But if not, please know we've got 4 of our representatives there that'll be for the duration. So please feel free to hit them up.
Dave, thank you so much.